I'm Autumn Hayes, and at 31, I thought I had finally found peace, running a small farm I inherited from my grandmother, far from boardrooms and family politics. But that peace shattered the day my own father drove a bulldozer through my greenhouses. My sister stood by, smiling. My mother watched from the car, all because I refused to sell the land they saw as profit, and I saw as purpose. What followed was betrayal so deep, it almost buried me. But this story isn't about staying down. It's about rebuilding, root by root, truth by truth. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand alone to protect something no one else believed in. This might be the story your heart needs today. Shall we go back for a moment? There's something you need to understand first. My bond with Grandma Esther was always different. It wasn't just warm, it was rooted. While my parents, Eleanor and Gregory Hayes, spent their days chasing promotions and corner offices in glass towers, I found my sanctuary in the countryside. Every summer, every long weekend, I'd escape to her wild patch of land. A tangle of green, fragrant with herbs, buzzing with bees, alive in a way the city never could be. It wasn't your typical farm, but more like a sprawling Eden she'd shaped with her bare hands. She taught me to touch the earth gently, to respect it. Her fingers, calloused from years of nurturing soil, guided mine as we planted dahlias and corn, basil and marigolds, each with its own purpose. "The land speaks, Autumn," she used to say, her voice calm and certain. But only the patient know how to listen. And I listened, like it was sacred scripture. My parents never really saw any of it. Not the garden, not me. They'd long traded dusty country roads for high-rise ambition. My father was deep in the world of finance, my mother embedded in high-stakes marketing. Both were obsessed with success, the kind that showed up in six-figure salaries and sleek portfolios. And they had a plan for us, me and my older sister Brooke, especially Brooke. She followed it to a business school, corporate ladder, endless networking events in heels and tailored blazers. I tried too, at first. Earned the degree, memorized the jargon. But late at night, I found myself drawn to something else entirely. I snuck in classes on environmental science, sustainable farming. Those lectures didn't just teach. They stirred something deeper in me, something Grandma had planted long ago. Esther, bless her, recognized that flicker before anyone else ever could. She'd call during the week, always checking in, asking about my classes, telling me about the seedlings she was experimenting with, or lamenting the rise of industrial farming that was stripping the soul from the soil. She cared about my education, sure, but it wasn't the business courses that impressed her. No, what lit her up was when I spoke about cover crops and compost systems. Meanwhile, my parents couldn't stop gushing about Brooke's latest client account or the bonus she landed. Esther, on the other hand, made a habit of bragging about my knowledge at the farmer's market, talking permaculture and heirloom seeds with her neighbors like I was saving the world. And maybe, in her eyes, I was. When she passed 3 years ago, a quiet ache took root inside me. It wasn't loud grief, but the kind that hums beneath your ribs. Losing her felt like someone had torn up the map to a place only we understood. Still, I took comfort in knowing we'd shared something real, something living. Everyone just assumed the property would be split neatly between Brooke and me. That 7-acre stretch wasn't worth a fortune in the market, but it held something no city condo ever could. The day we gathered for the reading of the will, tension hung thick in the room. Brooke sat beside our parents, legs crossed, smirking like she already had blueprints drawn. She leaned in, whispering about converting the old farmhouse into a trendy rental. "Rustic but high-end," she said with a wink. "Maybe even throw in a pool if there's space." My heart sank. Esther's garden, her sanctuary, reduced to a brochure-ready retreat for weekend brunches and filtered selfies. The lawyer began to speak, his voice measured and almost too calm for the storm he was about to stir. Each syllable echoed in that room like a bell tolling the start of something irreversible. "To my dear Autumn," he read, his tone even but reverent, "who understands the true value of this land and will carry forward its purpose. May you grow more than just crops here." The words were unmistakably Grandma Esther, wise, poetic, full of intention. She had left the entire property to me, not shared, not divided, just me. And with it, a modest trust, set aside specifically for the land's upkeep and future. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating. You could almost hear the sound of my sister's perfectly curated world collapsing. Brooke's face turned a shade I'd never seen before, something between rage and disbelief. Her frozen smile cracked like thin ice. My parents sat stiffly beside her, their expressions unreadable, though something flickered behind their eyes, maybe fear, maybe regret. No one said a word, not right away. The lawyer cleared his throat and shuffled his documents, buying time. And then, after a silence that seemed to stretch for miles, my father finally leaned forward. His voice was syrupy, but there was a chill beneath it. "Well, Autumn," he said with a forced chuckle, "I'm sure you'll do the right thing. Sell the place, split it evenly. That's what families do, isn't it?" I looked at him, but words failed me, not because I was uncertain, far from it. For the first time in my life, clarity hit me like a bolt of light. That land wasn't just dirt and grass and old wood. It was legacy. It was calling. And more than that, it was freedom. A doorway into the life I had always dreamed of, but never dared pursue. Not until now. So I stayed silent, letting my resolve speak for itself. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for claiming what had always felt like mine in spirit, even before it was mine in name. 2 weeks later, I walked away from my job in marketing. I handed in my resignation with a quiet kind of joy, like slipping out of clothes that had never truly fit. My parents were stunned, my mother clutching her pearls, my father shaking his head as if I'd joined a cult. My coworkers reacted with that fake concern people use when they think you've lost your grip. But I wasn't unraveling. I was coming home. Every part of me felt in tune with the choice, like my soul finally found its rhythm. I boxed up what little I had, drove out to Esther's slightly crooked, wind-whispering farmhouse, and began sketching the outlines of a dream. That first year nearly broke me. The farmhouse was endearing in its age, but also a stubborn old thing. Pipes leaked, windows rattled in every breeze, and the roof sighed like an old man in his sleep. The soil, once so rich under Esther's hands, had grown tired during her final years. It needed love, it needed time, so I gave it both. I learned by doing and by failing. I spent nearly all my savings on tools, compost, seedlings, lumber. Most days blurred into the next, sunup to well past sundown, my body aching in ways I didn't know it could. My hands, once soft from office work, and manicured to please my mother's standards, toughened fast, cracked, calloused, brown from sun and soil. I lost the shine my family once bragged about. My mother's eyes lingered a bit too long on my calloused fingers the last time she visited. I think it embarrassed her. But not me. I had never felt more alive. By the time the second year rolled around, something began to shift, quietly, but powerfully. It wasn't just the land that was transforming. I was too. I had erected 3 sizable greenhouses, giving me the ability to grow fresh produce through every season, rain or shine. My vegetable plots had stretched out to nearly 3 full acres, their layout meticulously planned with crop rotation and companion planting that kept the soil healthy and pests at bay. No chemicals needed. I carved out space for a small orchard of heirloom apple and pear trees, varieties chosen for their hardiness and rich old-world flavor. I even placed beehives along the property's edge, tiny kingdoms buzzing with life that gifted me not only pollination, but jars of golden, fragrant honey. And perhaps dearest to my heart, I installed a rain-fed irrigation system that made the farm almost entirely self-sustaining. Word started to spread. Local chefs, always eager for exceptional ingredients, began seeking me out. They praised the depth of flavor in my vegetables, the vibrancy, the unmistakable care grown into every bite. I landed permanent booths at 2 bustling farmers markets, and quickly built a loyal following of customers who signed up for weekly produce boxes. I named it Willow Creek Gardens, and while it wouldn't land me on any Forbes list, it paid the bills. It was real. It was alive. My days found a rhythm I had only ever dreamed of. Early mornings among dew-covered rows, afternoons spent planting, fixing, or managing invoices in Grandma's old sewing room, now my office. Evenings were filled with canning, researching, or swapping stories with fellow farmers who had become something of a second family. The farmhouse, once worn and drafty, became a reflection of both past and present. I preserved Grandma Esther's beloved antique pieces, her cedar rocking chair, the carved oak hutch, but added new touches. Soft white paint on the walls, large windows that invited in the morning light, and overlooked the orchard. The kitchen, once dark and dated, had become a cozy, working heart of the home. Open shelves lined with jars of preserved berries and tomatoes from my own harvest. No, it wasn't elegant by society's standards. There were no marble counters or designer backsplashes. But it was warm, honest, and every inch of it felt like mine. For a while, my family kept their distance, civil but cautious. My parents stopped by on occasion, though their visits were peppered with comments like, "Still playing farmer, are we?" Or, "Well, everyone needs a little fresh air before going back to the real world." They'd smile thinly, pretending to be amused, but I knew they were waiting for me to come to my senses. Brooke would call now and then, mostly on calendar-marked occasions, holidays, birthdays. Her tone was always clipped, her interest shallow at best. "Still growing lettuce or whatever it is?" she'd ask with a smirk I could hear through the phone. But the thing was, I didn't care. I had no space left for their condescension. I was too busy living a life that finally made sense. The land was sustaining me, in body, in spirit, in purpose, just as Grandma had always hoped it would. Everything shifted the day Brooke returned from California. It wasn't planned, it was sudden, almost theatrical. Her boutique marketing firm in Los Angeles had collapsed under its own glossy weight, leaving behind unpaid debts, shuttered office doors, and a pride so bruised you could practically see it in her posture. At 32, she moved back into our parents' oversized, sterile suburban house. Just for a little while, she claimed, while she figured things out. And that's when the dynamic within our family, already distant and uneasy, began to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. Her presence came with a quiet storm, one that didn't announce itself loudly, but eroded everything slowly, steadily. I remember the first time she came to see Willow Creek Gardens after she returned. I was genuinely eager, maybe even naive. I thought she might be proud, that she'd see the life I'd built and for once, see me. I walked her through the greenhouses, explained my soil rotation plans, composting system, and even gave her baskets of fresh produce, still warm from the morning sun. But her response was clipped, her smile faint and fixed. "Well, isn't this adorable?" she said, glancing at my dirt-streaked hands like they were something contagious. "You're really leaning into this farmer cosplay, huh?" Then she tilted her head. "I mean, with all the development around here, you ever think this land could be used for something, bigger?" I laughed nervously, thought maybe she was lashing out over her failed business, just venting. But it didn't stop there. Her visits became more frequent, her remarks sharper, less veiled. One day, as she half-heartedly helped me pick tomatoes, barely avoiding getting dirt on her manicured nails, she said, "You have no idea what kind of cash this land could bring in. Dominic says you're sitting on a gold mine." That was the first time I heard his name, Dominic, her latest boyfriend, a real estate developer with a crisp suit, perfect teeth, and eyes that saw my fields not as rows of sustenance and care, but as future condos and dollar signs. He visited once, walking the land with his hands in his pockets, surveying it like prey. Not a word about the farm itself, just lot size, zoning laws, return on investment. Before long, my parents started parroting their lines, as if they'd been briefed at some family strategy meeting I hadn't been invited to. Over dinner one evening, my mother sipped her wine and said with studied gentleness, "You've done well, Autumn, but don't you think it's a bit much for one woman to handle?" She glanced around the table, clearly hoping for agreement. "You could develop a portion, keep your little garden, make it manageable." Her tone made my skin crawl. A garden, that's what she thought this was? A quaint pastime? I tried to stay calm. "This is my business, Mom," I said. "It feeds people, it pays my bills, it matters." But my father just leaned in, voice low and stern, like he was closing a deal. "And yet, it's not the best use of a family asset. Brooke could really use a hand getting back on her feet. You're in a position to help if you'd stop being so unreasonable." From there, the pressure escalated. What began as casual suggestions quickly turned into thinly disguised accusations. I was being selfish, they said. Hoarding wealth. Forgetting what family meant. The fact that Grandma Esther had left the property solely to me, with clear intention and loving words, was no longer treated as relevant. It was as if her will was just a speed bump on their path to profit. Their entitlement crept in like ivy, quiet at first, then choking everything it touched. And no matter how calmly I reminded them of Grandma's wishes, or how fiercely I defended my life's work, it was never enough. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted control. One unusually warm evening, I drove over to pick up a few gardening tools I'd lent my father weeks earlier. As I neared the backyard, voices floated through the dusk, hushed but unmistakable. Brooke's voice, high with excitement, sliced through the fading light. "The back acres are just trees," she said. "Wasted space. Dominic says we could fit 6, maybe 7 luxury homes back there with a little rezoning. We're talking big profits." Then my father chimed in, his tone steely. "Autumn needs to remember her duty to this family. Your grandmother wouldn't have wanted only one granddaughter to benefit." I froze, unseen behind a row of shrubs, my heart thudding. I backed away slowly, the tools forgotten. That night, I called a local security company. Cameras went up the next morning. I told myself it was just precautionary. But the knot in my gut told another story. The situation took a darker turn when Brooke announced her engagement to Dominic, after only 4 months. My parents were beside themselves, practically glowing with pride. They threw a lavish engagement party, complete with waitstaff, champagne fountains, and dramatic floral arrangements. Brooke flaunted a diamond the size of a small iceberg, while Dominic strutted through the crowd, murmuring about investment potential and sustainable luxury builds. I stood on the edge of the room, sipping water, when I heard him say it, his voice silky and practiced. "We're looking at a prime parcel nearby. Very promising land. Great location, rich soil, just waiting to be reimagined." His gaze flicked to me for the briefest second, cold and sharp. My spine stiffened. That wasn't a comment, it was a warning. After the party, the pressure became relentless. My mother began calling every day, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Brooke's just had such terrible luck, sweetheart," she'd say, with an audible sigh. "And you've always had things fall into place. First Grandma Esther's obvious favoritism, then the land. Don't you think it's time you share your blessings?" The guilt was wrapped in sweetness, but the message was clear. I tried to meet them halfway. I even offered Brooke a role in the farm's expansion. "You could run the website, help with branding," I suggested. "We could grow this together." She didn't even pretend to consider it. "I'm not wasting my time peddling vegetables," she snapped. "Dominic and I have actual business plans. You know, things that matter." Then came the sign I could no longer ignore. One morning, I walked out to find part of my irrigation system had been tampered with, deliberately. A section of young pepper plants sat in standing water, their roots rotting, leaves limp and yellow. It wasn't clumsy or random, it was surgical. Whoever had done it understood how the system worked. No evidence, no confrontation, just silence and damage. I upgraded all the security cameras to high resolution, set motion alerts, and started photographing everything. Plants, tools, deliveries, soil levels. I kept meticulous logs. I didn't want to believe it. But something had shifted. The tension was no longer just emotional. It had become strategic. Quiet, calculated pressure building, like a storm waiting for a spark. Still, I kept up appearances. Sunday brunches at my parents' home had long been a family tradition, though lately they felt more like polite performances than real connection. That June morning began like the others, on the surface. But from the moment I pulled my muddy pickup into their pristine driveway, I sensed it. Something was off. Brooke's brand new Mercedes convertible gleamed in the sun, proudly displayed like a showroom prize. Odd for someone who'd supposedly been rebuilding her life. Mom greeted me with a smile that felt more rehearsed than warm, her voice pitched too high. Dad hovered, unusually helpful, offering me a mimosa the second I stepped through the door. Brooke was already seated at the table, thumbing through her phone, her nails freshly done and outfit gleaming with silent expense. "Oh, Autumn, you made it," she said flatly, not bothering to look up. The dining room was set with their finest china, elegant, formal, too formal, the kind of table setting they only brought out when something was about to change. The conversation during brunch never found its footing. It skimmed the surface, filled with pleasantries that felt rehearsed. Mom made a vague reference to my little garden, choosing not to acknowledge it as a working farm. Dad rambled about bumping into someone from my high school, someone I barely remembered. Meanwhile, Brooke occupied herself with her ring, casually angling her hand under the chandelier light, so the diamond would catch every reflection, like a crown she believed she'd earned. I answered their hollow questions while staying alert, watching as they exchanged brief, knowing glances when they thought I wasn't looking. There was something coordinated about it all, something staged, deliberate. As dessert plates were cleared, the air in the room thickened. Dad folded his napkin slowly, like a man preparing to deliver news that wasn't meant to be received kindly. He cleared his throat, a dramatic cue I'd heard many times before in boardroom speeches and serious family talks. "Autumn," he began, in the tone he reserved for closing business deals. "We need to have a conversation about the land." Instantly, the temperature dropped. Mom's smile evaporated. Brooke lowered her phone with the faintest smirk curling at the corners of her mouth. My pulse quickened. "What land situation?" I asked, though my body already knew the answer. "Your grandmother's property," Dad continued, calmly but pointedly. "Or rather, the family estate you're currently occupying." "It's not a family estate," I replied, my voice steady, if tight. "It was left to me, explicitly and legally. That's what her will says." Mom leaned in then, her voice smooth, but sharpened like a blade in velvet. "That's a technicality, darling. Your grandmother never imagined this kind of opportunity. She would have wanted both her granddaughters to thrive." Brooke's eyes sparkled as she slid forward in her seat. "Actually, Autumn, Dominic and I have been working on something incredible. His firm is beyond excited. They've been drawing up plans for months. It's going to be beautiful." "Plans for what exactly?" I asked, though the cold knot in my stomach gave me the answer before she did. "Windermere Estates," she announced, beaming with pride. From beside her, she pulled a sleek, designer folder and flipped it open with a flourish. Inside were detailed renderings of sprawling luxury homes, glistening driveways, fountains, and sterile landscaping. And beneath the digital polish, I saw the outline of my land, my home. Willow Creek Gardens, gone, replaced with driveways, fountains, and soulless cul-de-sacs. This is my property," I whispered. I traced the familiar bend of the creek, the shape of my orchard. Even the old oak tree stood, repurposed as a scenic backdrop for a clubhouse. "We made a few changes," Dominic said, stepping out of the kitchen like a ghost. Whispering Creek felt outdated. Windermere tested better with focus groups. It's more aspirational. I stared at them, unable to fully process the weight of what I was seeing. "You've been designing developments on my land without telling me?" I asked, voice barely audible. "We're telling you now," my father said matter-of-factly. "This is a family decision, Autumn. You need to think beyond yourself." Brooke slid another document across the table, an official proposal. "We're not taking it all, Autumn," she said with faux reassurance. "Just the back 3 acres. You'll still have the house. And enough land for your farmer's market project." I sat up straighter, blood rushing in my ears. "My farm is not a side project," I said, sharper than I intended. "It's a business. It's how I live. Grandma left it to me because she knew I'd protect it, not sell it off for a pool and a zip code." "Darling," my mother sighed, waving a hand as though brushing away an overreaction. "No one's trying to destroy anything. It's a sustainable, environmentally conscious development. Look, there's even a garden, a nod to the legacy." I glanced down. One page in the proposal showed a tiny, decorative patch of grass and neatly trimmed hedges labeled Heritage Garden. That was their tribute. 2 years of dawn-to-dusk labor, my entire livelihood, reduced to a prop for wealthy homeowners, a marketing gimmick for a lifestyle they'd never truly live. They didn't see what I'd built. To them, it was just acreage waiting to be repurposed, and I, inconveniently, was in the way. "This isn't happening," I said, pushing the glossy documents away with trembling hands. "I'm not surrendering the land." My father's face hardened, his expression turning to stone, eyes void of warmth. "Autumn, don't be irrational. Brooke is entitled to her piece of the legacy too. She needs this chance, and frankly, it's your duty as her sister to support her." I met his stare head-on, the room's temperature seeming to drop with every breath. "And if I don't?" I asked, my voice brittle but unflinching. He leaned in then, voice low and unnervingly calm. "Then you're choosing soil over blood. And if that's the case, don't expect any of us to catch you when this little back-to-the-land fantasy of yours falls apart." "Dad," I whispered, stunned at how blatant the threat was. Brooke chimed in, her voice sugar-coated, yet somehow sharper than his. "It's just business, Autumn. Come on. You know that land's going to be developed sooner or later. Wouldn't you rather keep it in the family instead of letting strangers turn it into strip malls? She smiled sweetly, sliding the papers toward me again. Just sign over 3 acres. That's all we're asking. You'll still get a cut of the profits. Everyone wins. Her tone was casual, like she was offering me a piece of cake, not asking me to erase everything I'd built from the earth up. I stood, grabbing my bag with fingers that could barely keep steady. My heart was pounding, not just with fury, but with something deeper. Grief. No, I said, trying to hold my voice steady. Grandma trusted me. She gave me that land because she knew I'd protect it. And I will. Not for money, not for you. Mom's mask finally slipped, her voice laced with venom. You ungrateful girl, she snapped, rising from her chair. After all we've done for you. I turned to face her fully. What exactly have you done? Belittled my work? Drafted blueprints for property that's not yours? Schemed behind my back to steal what Grandma left to me? You're going to regret this autumn, my father growled, standing up so abruptly his chair clattered to the floor behind him. His eyes narrowed. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. I took a breath, willing the tears to stay put, even as they burned behind my eyes. The real mistake, I said, voice trembling but clear, was thinking any of you respected my choices or cared about Grandma's wishes. As I turned to leave, Brooke's voice rang out behind me, sharp and slicing. This isn't over, Autumn. That land belongs to the family, not just you. I walked out without another word, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest like stone. To them, my life's work was nothing more than real estate potential, wasted on carrots and calendula. That night, sleep didn't come. By sunrise, I was already calling the security company. I couldn't afford to be naive anymore. Mike, the technician who came out, was cheerful and kind, though clearly confused by the urgency. He worked efficiently, installing newer, higher-definition cameras on every corner of the house and field. Planning on guarding Fort Knox, Miss Hayes, he teased, chuckling as he adjusted the angle over my greenhouse. I forced a polite smile. Just protecting something valuable, I replied. I couldn't tell him the danger wasn't from outsiders. It was coming from my own flesh and blood. Later that day, my phone buzzed. A message from Brooke lit up the screen. Last chance to be smart about this. Dad and Dominic are meeting with the zoning board tomorrow. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling a chill spread through me like frost creeping across glass. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I turned all that fear into purpose. I spent the afternoon documenting every inch of my farm. I photographed every bed of vegetables, every tree, every hose, every system. I updated my records with precision, copying customer contracts and compiling sales reports. Somewhere in my gut, I knew, if they were going to try and take this from me, they'd have to fight against hard proof, and the full weight of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. The next 2 days crawled by in a haze of nerves and dread. I jumped at every engine in the distance, flinched at every unfamiliar figure near the road. I kept bracing for something, an angry visit, a threatening call, even a legal notice. But nothing came. No knock, no voicemail, no sign. Just a silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like the quiet before thunder breaks the sky. An uneasy stillness that prickled at the back of my neck like a warning. Wednesday arrived, and with it, my busiest day of the week. 3 restaurant deliveries lined up in the next town. These clients were essential to my survival. Missing them wasn't an option, no matter how tightly my gut twisted. I was gently loading crates of heirloom tomatoes and heads of lettuce into the truck when my phone rang. It was Patrick, my elderly neighbor, a kind-hearted man who had been close to Grandma Esther and had always treated me like family. His voice, usually calm and measured, was frantic. "Autumn, you've got to come now," he cried, breathless. "It's your father. He's out in your fields with some kind of machine. He's tearing it all up." My body went cold in an instant. "Call the police," I gasped, already sprinting to the driver's seat. "I'm 15 minutes away. Just call them, please." But the drive back was a blur of gravel, panic, and white-knuckled speed. My heart thudded in my chest like a war drum. I tried calling my father, straight to voicemail, tried Brooke, tried Mom, nothing. No one picked up. The closer I got, the louder the sound grew. Not voices, not shouting, machinery. A mechanical growl that rattled through the trees like thunder rolling across the hills. And then I saw it. Rounding the bend in the dirt road, Willow Creek Gardens opened before me, or what was left of it. My breath caught in my throat. There he was, my father, Gregory Hayes, seated inside a bulldozer like he belonged there, like he had every right. The metal blade glinted in the morning sun like a weapon, carving jagged scars into the soil I had loved and nurtured. He drove straight through my rows of lettuce, uprooting months of careful work in seconds. One of my greenhouses, my pride, my investment, my shelter for tender crops, was already gone, reduced to a heap of crumpled plastic and bent steel. Water lines sprayed wildly where they'd been severed, like veins slashed open. My fields, my future, were turning into mud beneath heavy treads. I slammed on the brakes, the truck jolting to a stop. I jumped out, phone in hand, already recording as I ran, feet sinking into the soft earth. "Dad, stop! What are you doing?" I screamed, my voice breaking with panic and disbelief. He turned, saw me. I know he saw me. But he didn't stop. The bulldozer just kept moving, slow and merciless, crushing my pepper plants as though they meant nothing. "This has gone on long enough, Autumn," he bellowed over the roar of the engine. His face was tight, jaw clenched in that cold executive expression he wore in meetings. "You brought this on yourself." I tried to run alongside, waving, pleading, my voice hoarse with grief. "You're destroying everything. This is my land, my business. Please." That's when I saw it. Tucked behind a thin screen of pines near the edge of the property, partially concealed as if on purpose, sat my mother's car. She was inside, her face buried in her hands. The picture of performative despair. Not true grief, but something rehearsed. Just a prop in the drama. And there, standing beside the car, arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes fixed on the chaos with a grim, smug satisfaction, was Brooke. She had brought him. She had stood by and let it happen. And now she was watching it all unfold, as if it were exactly what she had expected. Or worse, what she had hoped for. "Dad, please stop!" I shouted again, desperate now, edging closer even though the bulldozer's massive blade swung perilously in my direction. "This is illegal! You have no right!" But he didn't flinch. Instead, he turned the machine toward my smaller greenhouse, the one dedicated to herbs, where I'd nurtured basil, thyme, and lavender from seed. "This land belongs to your sister now," he roared, his voice hoarse and wild, twisted with a fury I had never seen from him before. "You had your chance, and you threw it away." With one last violent push, he plowed straight through the greenhouse, collapsing it into a heap of shattered glass and mangled metal. Just then, faint but growing louder, sirens. Patrick had kept his promise. Help was on the way. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly keep the phone steady, but I didn't stop recording. I stumbled backward toward the driveway to meet the approaching police, heart racing as I captured every last second of devastation. Within moments, 2 patrol cars rolled up, lights flashing, sirens fading into the tense, stunned silence. My father, finally registering what he'd done, climbed down from the bulldozer. He straightened his jacket, as if that could somehow restore dignity to what had just occurred. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked. Surveying the ruined landscape with wide, disbelieving eyes, my father cleared his throat and adopted the calm corporate voice he'd always used in boardrooms and business luncheons. "Just a family misunderstanding, officer," he said smoothly. "Some confusion about land use, nothing more." He smiled faintly, as if the bulldozer hadn't just ripped through 2 greenhouses. "My daughter and I were having a disagreement." I stepped forward, voice shaking but unwavering. "That's not true. This is my farm, my property. I hold the deed. He came here uninvited and caused thousands in damage." Brooke drifted into view, her expression cool, unbothered. "She's exaggerating, officer," she said, standing beside him. "This land was always meant to be shared. We're just reclaiming what belongs to the family." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly taken aback by the contrast between our stories. They separated us and began taking statements. Additional units arrived soon after. Clearly, they now understood the seriousness of the situation. I went to the house and returned with the property deed, the legal proof that the land was mine and mine alone. Then I pulled up the footage from my newly installed security system. High-resolution video played on my tablet screen, showing everything. The bulldozer being hauled in, my father at the controls, my mother and Brooke arriving separately, and watching quietly, as it all unfolded. Every destructive pass, every smashed structure, every shouted word. One officer turned to my father. "These cameras are new?" he asked. My father's face blanched as the footage looped on screen. "She installed them just to trap us," he snapped. The officer's expression didn't change. "So, you knew this was planned ahead of time?" he asked slowly, raising an eyebrow. My father fell silent. The implication of his own words hung heavy in the air, undeniable. The damage had been done, not just to the farm, but to everything that once held our family together. The police documented everything with meticulous care, photographing the devastation from every conceivable angle. They interviewed Patrick, my elderly neighbor and longtime friend of Grandma Esther, who'd seen the worst of it unfold from his porch. A specialist familiar with agricultural damage was called in. He moved slowly through the wreckage, his boots crunching glass and soil, his face dark with quiet disbelief. His initial estimate was sobering, over $75,000 in damages. Between the leveled greenhouses, destroyed irrigation lines, precision equipment, and wiped-out crops, it wasn't just a loss. It was a gutting. "We'll need you to come down to the station to file formal charges, Miss Hayes," the lead officer told me gently, his tone laced with real sympathy. "This goes beyond civil matters. We're likely talking felony property destruction." I nodded, too numb to speak, as I watched the officers guide my family off the land. My father walked stiffly, his expression one of disbelief, like he couldn't comprehend how things had come to this, as though he had been wronged. My mother trailed behind, eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to meet mine. And Brooke turned toward me at the last second, her expression carved from bitterness. Her stare was ice. "This isn't over," she snapped, her voice slicing through the morning air like a blade. "You've picked the wrong side, Autumn." Then they were gone, their tires stirring dust along the road that once led to peace. When the sirens faded and the last uniform left, silence fell across Willow Creek Gardens. But it wasn't the comforting stillness I'd always known. It felt hollow now, a deafening void. I stood alone in what used to be the heart of my work, my hope. My lush rows of vegetables were unrecognizable, reduced to muddy trenches and mangled roots. The greenhouse I had saved for, built with my own 2 hands, lay twisted and broken like a carcass. Severed irrigation lines sputtered water into the air like wounds that refused to clot. Only then, when there was no one left to witness it, did the dam inside me finally burst. I sank to the soil, sobbing until my body ached, mourning not just the destruction of my farm, but the undeniable, shattering loss of the family I once believed in. The following morning brought no relief, only clarity, sharp and cruel under the sunlight. The damage was even worse than it had looked through tears. The greenhouse, once the bustling center of my operation, was a ruin of shattered glass and bent steel. Nearly half of my vegetables, the ones I'd nurtured through spring's late frosts, were gone, flattened. The irrigation system would need a complete rebuild, and the soil, compacted beyond what roots could tolerate, would need months, maybe longer, to heal. I was out there, camera in hand, trying to document everything for insurance, when a familiar truck pulled into the drive. Marcus, owner of the Green Plate, one of my most loyal restaurant clients, stepped out slowly, his eyes widened as they scanned the wreckage. "Good Lord, Autumn, what in the world happened here?" I tried to explain, though my voice trembled with every word. Told him, as best I could, about the family dispute turned violent, about my father's betrayal. Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't offer empty sympathy or ask questions I couldn't answer. He simply pulled out his phone. "I'm calling everyone I know," he said, firm and steady. "This isn't something you're going to face alone." His words settled over me like a blanket, warm, sure, and deeply needed. By mid-afternoon, the news had spread across our small, tightly knit farming community like dry grass catching flame. Help came in waves. 3 neighboring farmers, men weathered by decades of harvests and heartbreak, showed up with their own tools, ready to work. Sarah, the head chef at Hearth and Home Bistro, arrived with her full kitchen crew. They weren't just chefs that day. They were laborers, shoulders squared, hands gloved. No one spoke much. We simply moved. Quietly, deliberately, we organized what remained. We salvaged every intact crop, bundled and stored what could be saved. What was lost, we cleared with care, like mourners cleaning up after a funeral. honoring the dead with every soft touch of a trowel. In the aftermath of the destruction, I found myself plunged into the unforgiving world of legal warfare. The very next morning, after filing the police report, I contacted an attorney, Simone Dubois, a specialist in property law and environmental litigation. She greeted me with a composed demeanor, listening intently as I laid everything out: the deed to the land, the incident report, my business ledgers, and the deeply unsettling footage from my security cameras. She asked precise, thoughtful questions, jotting down notes in a methodical hand. When I finished, she sat back, adjusted her glasses, and gave me a measured nod. "Your case is strong, Autumn. Legally speaking, you have a clear title, detailed documentation, and irrefutable video evidence. In terms of criminal property damage, this is about as open and shut as it gets." But then, her expression shifted slightly, as she slid a new document across the desk, one that chilled me in an entirely different way. "That said," Simone added, her voice gentler now, "your family has already filed a petition contesting the will. They're alleging undue influence in the final months of your grandmother's life." I stared at the papers, disbelieving. "That's absurd." Grandma Esther was sharper than anyone I knew. She wasn't confused. She chose to leave it to me. Simone nodded, unsurprised. "They're suggesting you isolated her, manipulated her into rewriting the will in your favor. It's a familiar tactic in inheritance cases, rarely successful, but enough to create noise and drag out proceedings." I felt sick. It wasn't about fairness, it was strategy. Delay, distract, discredit. Over the next few days, the picture grew darker. A pattern began to emerge, one far more deliberate than I had dared imagine. It turned out Dominic wasn't just Brooke's fiancé. He was a senior acquisitions officer at Aegis Properties, a major real estate conglomerate known for quietly buying up farmland and converting it into high-end housing developments. I learned they'd already approached several of my neighbors, offering well above market value for their land. Most had refused. "This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment idea," Patrick told me one afternoon, carrying over a folder of yellowed zoning records. "They've had their eyes on your farm for months." He pointed out dates, zoning change requests targeting my property, filed weeks before Brooke ever came back from California. The plan hadn't begun at Sunday brunch. It had started long before that, carefully orchestrated. The betrayal wasn't spontaneous, it was engineered. Then, 1 week to the day after the destruction, came a letter that turned my stomach. It arrived from my family's lawyer, cold and professional, offering what they called a settlement. If I signed over a portion of the land to Brooke, they would agree to drop the charges against my father. The letter claimed I had provoked my father's actions with my unwillingness to share family resources, framing his rampage as an emotional outburst rather than a crime. Simone barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "Absolutely not," she said. "This is coercion, plain and simple. They assumed you'd fold under pressure. They underestimated you, Autumn. We're pursuing both criminal and civil actions. No compromises." And truly, I was running on sheer willpower alone. Sleep slipped further from reach with each night. I tossed beneath the weight of nightmares. Machines tearing through soil, my father's rage burning behind his eyes. I lost weight, flinched at the sound of distant engines, checked my camera feeds with compulsive frequency. The farm, once a sanctuary where I had found peace, now felt like fragile ground, scarred, vulnerable. Every corner echoed with the memory of what had been crushed. Some nights, I'd lie awake and wonder if they'd been right all along. Maybe I was foolish to believe I could defend this land alone. Maybe this dream had always been too much to carry. It was a gray Tuesday morning, the sky heavy with rain, when I heard the sound of multiple vehicles pulling into the driveway. It had been 3 weeks since the court hearing, and my heart sank, unsure of what to expect. But when I mustered the courage to peek through the window, what I saw was not another legal ambush. It was a convoy of kindness. Marcus from the Green Plate stepped out first, followed by a group that quickly grew to 24 strong. Many were faces I recognized, fellow farmers, restaurant partners, local folks I'd crossed paths with. Others I knew only by name or reputation. "We figured you'd been carrying this long enough, Autumn," Marcus said with a warm, steady smile. "It's time to rebuild." That day marked a turning point, not just for the farm, but for my spirit. The community I had slowly woven myself into over the past 2 years showed up in full force. Local growers brought seedlings to replace the ones lost, offering both guidance and elbow grease. Restaurant owners stepped forward with prepaid orders, giving me vital cash flow to cover gaps left by insurance delays. Students from a nearby agricultural college heard about what had happened and chose my farm as the subject of their capstone project. They brought fresh ideas and sustainable design strategies that would have made Grandma Esther proud. What had begun as a quiet, solitary endeavor now pulsed with collective energy. Each weekend, more volunteers arrived, tilling, planting, repairing. I learned to do something I hadn't known I needed: to accept help, to let others shoulder the weight with me. Little by little, Willow Creek Gardens came back to life, not as a replica of what once was, but as something even stronger. With court-awarded damages and insurance funds, we didn't just rebuild, we reimagined. The new greenhouse boasted climate control and space-optimized growing systems. The redesigned irrigation system emphasized resilience and water conservation. In the areas scarred by the bulldozer, we built terraces, raised beds with better drainage and erosion control. The land began to heal, and in the midst of physical restoration, I started tending to the wounds I couldn't see. At Marcus's gentle urging, I began therapy. The sessions helped me name what I had endured: betrayal, grief, loss, but also strength, resilience, and the slow, steady return of hope. I came to understand something my grandmother had lived by. Family isn't defined by blood, but by those who show up, who believe in who you truly are. Then, 6 months after the worst day of my life, something unexpected arrived. A letter, not from the court and not from another lawyer, but from my mother, written in her delicate, unmistakable script on her own stationery, not the family's monogrammed kind. Autumn, it began, the ink slightly uneven. I'm writing this without your father's knowledge. What happened was inexcusable. I won't try to defend what I did or didn't do. But in court, watching you stand your ground, I saw Esther's strength in you. She would have been proud. I'm not asking for anything, not forgiveness, not reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that at least one of us sees the wrong that was done. She signed it simply, Eleanor Hayes. No love, no warmth, just her name. I never replied. But I tucked the letter between the pages of Grandma Esther's journal. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. A crack in the wall. And strangely, it was enough to help me move forward. Not long after, Patrick shared some news over coffee one morning. Brooke and Dominic had parted ways. Aegis Properties had swiftly distanced itself from Dominic, once the publicity from my case became a stain on their polished brand. Without his connections and corporate backing, his so-called professional vision seemed to dry up overnight. Brooke, disillusioned by his fading prospects, apparently didn't stick around. My father, meanwhile, received a suspended sentence and was ordered to complete extensive community service for the damage he caused. Quietly and with no fanfare, my parents and Brooke moved out of state, fleeing the sideways glances, the whispered judgments, and the lingering reminder of a scheme that had failed so publicly and so completely. Exactly 1 year after the destruction, I hosted a harvest dinner in the heart of the central garden, once flattened, now lovingly restored. Long handcrafted tables lined the rebuilt space, nestled among lush beds of herbs and vegetables. 40 guests sat under the golden light of dusk. Volunteers, neighbors, chefs, students, and friends, each one a thread in the tapestry of Willow Creek Gardens' rebirth. The meal was prepared using ingredients grown on that very land, fresh, vibrant, and full of life. It was more than a celebration. It was living proof that something once torn apart could not only be repaired but flourish. Since then, the farm hadn't just recovered, it had grown. The media attention, though painful at first, sparked regional interest in sustainable farming. My customer base doubled. I expanded the CSA program to serve 50 families and opened a weekly market stall that now had a waiting list. But beyond numbers and crops, what mattered most was the shift in my understanding of family. I had come to see the difference between those connected to you by blood and those bound by shared purpose. The people who helped rebuild Willow Creek Gardens, who showed up day after day with tools, encouragement, and open hands, became my true kin. They believed in the mission, in me. Grandma Esther had seen that possibility all along. She hadn't just left me land. She left me a foundation for something deeper. To honor her, I established a scholarship at the local agricultural college in her name, awarded each year to a student with a heart for sustainable farming. It felt like the most fitting tribute, a legacy that would grow far beyond our soil. Some evenings, when the wind rustles the rows of tomatoes and the air carries the rich scent of night-blooming flowers, I walk the fields and let myself reflect. This land has taught me things I never learned in a classroom. That defending what matters isn't selfish, it's sacred. That forgiveness doesn't require you to reopen old wounds. That sometimes walking away from family doesn't mean failure, it means freedom. And perhaps most important of all, I came to understand that Grandma's real gift wasn't just the acreage. It was the quiet confidence she placed in me, the belief that I had the resilience to weather storms I hadn't yet seen. The farm had always been a reflection of that strength, growing, healing, enduring. Today, Willow Creek Gardens thrives. It carries visible marks of its past, the greenhouse materials slightly mismatched, the new orchard trees still gaining their footing, the terraced land where the soil had once been crushed under steel. But these aren't scars to hide. They're proof of resurrection, proof that something broken can become something even more beautiful, that when a community comes together, truly, with heart, anything is possible. So now I ask you, what's your story? Has anyone ever tried to take something from you or pressure you to walk away from what you believed in? I'd be honored to hear your experience in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, if it offered comfort or even a flicker of strength, please consider liking and subscribing. I share real stories of resilience, authenticity, and finding your voice in unlikely places. Thank you for listening, and always remember, sometimes the family we build is far more powerful than the one we're born into. Your presence here means more than you know.